On the 2nd of January, Columbus caused his soldiers to act a mimic battle, greatly to the admiration of the cacique and his subjects. Afterwards, the admiral chose out 39 men to form the garrison of the fortress during his absence, naming Rodrigo de Escovedo as their commander. The greater part of the cargo of the Santa Maria was to be left behind with them for their year's provision. Amongst these first colonists of the New World were included a writer, an alguazil, a cooper, a doctor, and a tailor. These Spaniards were charged with the mission of seeking for gold mines and of choosing a suitable site for the building of a town. On the 3rd of January, after solemn leave-takings of the cacique and the new colonists, the Nina weighed anchor and sailed out of the harbor. An island was soon discovered, having upon it a very high mountain. To this was given the name of Monte Cristi. Columbus had already sailed for 2 days along the coast, when he was aware of the approach of the Pinta, and very soon her captain, Martin Alonso Pinzon, came on board the Nina, endeavoring to excuse his conduct. The real truth was that Pinzon had taken the lead with the view of being the first to reach the pretended island of Babek, of which the riches had been described in glowing colors by the natives. The admiral was very ready to accept the bad reasons given him by Captain Pinzon, and learnt from him that the Pinta had done nothing but coast along the shores of Hispaniola without discovering any new island. On the 7th of January, the ships lay to stop a leak which had sprung in the hold of the Nina. Columbus profited by this delay to explore a wide river, situated about 3 miles from Monte Cristi, and which carried so much gold dust along with it that he gave it the name of the Golden River. The admiral would have desired to visit this part of Hispaniola with greater care, but the crews were in haste to return home, and under the influence of the brothers Pinzon, began to murmur against his authority. On the 9th of January, the caravels set sail and steered towards the east-southeast, skirting the coast, and distinguishing by names even its smallest sinuosities. Of such were Point Isabella, the Cape of La Roca, French Cape, Cape Cabron, and the Bay of Samana, situated at the eastern extremity of the island, where was a port, in which the fleet, being becalmed, came to anchor. At first the relations between the foreigners and the natives were excellent, but a change was suddenly perceived, the savages ceasing to barter and making some hostile demonstrations, which left no doubt of the bad intentions entertained by them. On the 13th of January, the savages made a sudden and unexpected attack upon the Spaniards, who, however, put a bold face on the matter, and by the aid of their weapons, put their enemies to flight after a few minutes' combat. Thus, for the first time, the blood of the Indian flowed beneath the hand of the European. On the morrow, Columbus again set sail, having on board 4 young natives, whom, notwithstanding their objections, he persisted in carrying off with him. His crews, embittered and fatigued, caused him great uneasiness, and in his narrative of the voyage, this great man, superior though he were to all human weaknesses, and a being whom adverse fate could not humble, bemoans himself bitterly over this trial. It was on the 16th of January that the homeward voyage commenced in good earnest, and Cape Samana, the extreme point of Hispaniola, disappeared below the horizon. The passage proved a quick one, and no incident is recorded until the 12th of February, when the vessels encountered a fearful storm lasting 3 days, with furious wind, enormous waves, and much lightning from the north-northeast. 3 times did the terrified sailors make a vow of pilgrimage to St. Mary of Guadalupe, to Our Lady of Loreto, and to St. Clara of Marga, and at length, in extremity of fear, the whole crew swore to go and pray in their shirts, and with naked feet in some church dedicated to the Virgin. But in spite of all, the storm raged with redoubled fury, and even the admiral feared for the result. In case of a catastrophe, he thought it well hastily to write upon a parchment an abstract of his discoveries, with a request that whoever should find the document would forward it to the King of Spain. Wrapping the parchment in oil cloth, he enclosed it in a wooden barrel, which was thrown into the sea. At sunrise, on the 15th of February, the hurricane abated. The 2 caravels, which had been separated by the storm, again joined company, and after 3 days, they cast anchor at the island of St. Mary, one of the Azores. As soon as they arrived there, the admiral sought to further the accomplishment of the vows made during the storm, and with this object sent half of his people on shore, but these were unhappily made prisoners by the Portuguese, who did not restore them to liberty for 5 days, notwithstanding the urgent remonstrances made by Columbus. The admiral put to sea again on the 23rd of February. Again the winds were contrary, and again, amidst a violent tempest, he took fresh vows in company with all his crew, promising to fast on the first Saturday which should follow their arrival in Spain. At last, on the 4th of March, the pilots sighted the mouth of the Tagus, in which the Nina took refuge, whilst the Pinta, caught by the wind, was carried away into the Bay of Biscay. The Portuguese welcomed the admiral kindly, the king even admitting him to an audience. Columbus was in haste to return to Spain. As soon as the weather permitted, the Nina again set sail, and at midday on the 15th of March, she cast anchor in the port of Palos, after 7 months and a half of navigation, during which Columbus had discovered the islands of San Salvador, Conception, Great Exuma, Long Island, the Mucaras, Cuba, and San Domingo. The court of Ferdinand and Isabella was then at Barcelona, whither the admiral was summoned. He set out immediately, taking with him the Indians whom he had brought from the New World. The enthusiasm he excited was extreme. From all parts the people ran to look at him as he passed, rendering him royal honors. His entry into Barcelona was magnificent. The king and queen, with the grandees of Spain, received him with great pomp at the palace of the deputation. He there gave an account of his wonderful voyage, and presented the specimens of gold which he had brought with him. Then all the assembly knelt down and chanted the Te Deum. Christopher Columbus was afterwards ennobled by letters patent, and the king granted him a coat of arms bearing this device: To Castile and Leon, Columbus gives a new world. The fame of the Genoese navigator rang through the whole of Europe. The Indians whom he had brought with him were baptized in presence of the whole court, and thus the man of genius, so long poor and unknown, had now risen to the highest point of celebrity. Chapter 3. Christopher Columbus. Second voyage. Flotilla of 17 vessels, island of Ferro, Dominica, Marie Galante, Guadeloupe, the Cannibals, Montserrat, Santa Maria la Redonda, St. Martin and Santa Cruz, archipelago of the 11,000 Virgins, the island of St. John Baptist, or Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, the first colonists massacred, foundation of the town of Isabella, 12 ships laden with treasure sent to Spain, Fort St. Thomas built in the province of Cibao. Don Diego, Columbus' brother, named governor of the island. Jamaica, the coast of Cuba, the Remora returned to Isabella. The cacique made prisoner, revolt of the natives, famine, Columbus traduced in Spain, Juan Aguado sent as commissary to Isabella, gold mines, departure of Columbus, his arrival at Cadiz. The narrative of the adventures of the great Genoese navigator had overexcited the minds of the hearers. Imagination already caught glimpses of golden continents situated beyond the seas. All the passions which are engendered by cupidity were seething in the people's hearts. The admiral, under pressure of public opinion, must set forth again with the most brief delay. He was himself also eager to return to the theater of his conquests and to yet enrich the maps of the day with more new discoveries. He declared himself, therefore, ready to start. The king and queen placed at his disposal a flotilla composed of 3 large ships and 14 caravels. 1,200 men were to sail in them. Several Castilian nobles, with firm faith in the lucky star of Columbus, decided to try their fortune with him beyond seas. In the holds of the vessels were horses, cattle, instruments of all kinds for collecting and purifying gold, grain of various kinds, in a word, everything that might be needful in the establishing an important colony. Of the 10 natives brought to Europe, 5 returned to their country, 3, who were ill, remained behind in Europe, the other 2 were dead. Columbus was named Captain General of the squadron, with unlimited powers. On the 25th of September, 1493, the 17 ships left Cadiz, with all sails set, amidst the acclamations of an immense crowd of people, and on the 1st of October, they cast anchor at the island of Ferro, the most westerly of the Canary group. On sailing again, the fleet was favored by wind and sea, and after 23 days of navigation came in sight of new land. At sunrise on the 3rd of November, being the Sunday in the octave of All Saints, the pilot of the flagship, the Marie Galante, cried out, "Good news, there is land. This land proved to be an island covered with trees. The admiral, thinking it uninhabited, did not stop, but after passing several scattered islets, he arrived before a second island. The first he named Dominica, the second Marie Galante, names which they retain to the present day. The next day a still larger island was in sight, and says the narrative of this voyage given by Peter Martyr, the contemporary of Columbus. When they were arrived, they saw it was the island of the infamous cannibals, or Caribbees, of whom they had only heard a rumor during the first voyage. The Spaniards, well armed, landed upon the shore, where they found about 30 circular houses built of wood and covered with palm leaves. In the interior of the huts were suspended hammocks made of cotton. In the center of the village were placed 2 trees or posts around which were entwined the dead bodies of 2 serpents. At the approach of the strangers, the natives fled in haste, leaving behind them several prisoners whom they were preparing to devour. The sailors searched the houses and found both leg and arm bones, heads so newly cut off that the blood was still moist, and other human remains, which left no doubt as to the food consumed by these Caribbees. This island, which, with its principal rivers, the admiral caused to be partially explored, was named Guadeloupe, on account of the resemblance it bore to one of the Spanish provinces. Some Indian women were carried off by the sailors, but after having been kindly treated on board the admiral's ship, they were sent back to land, Columbus hoping that this conduct towards the females would induce the men of the place to come on board, but in this he was disappointed. The sailors find some recently severed heads. The sailors find some recently severed heads. On the 8th of November, the signal for departure was given, and the whole fleet sailed for Hispaniola, the present San Domingo, and the island upon which Columbus had left 39 of the companions of his first voyage. In turning again towards the north, a large island was discovered, to which the natives who had been kept on board, after having been saved from the jaws of the Caribbees, gave the name of Mandanino. They declared that it was inhabited only by women, and as Marco Polo had mentioned an Asiatic country which possessed an exclusively feminine population, Columbus was confirmed in the idea that he was sailing upon the coast of Asia. He felt a great desire to explore this island, but the contrary winds completely prevented his doing so. 30 miles from thence, an island was seen surrounded by high mountains. It received the name of Montserrat. On the next day another, which was called Santa Maria la Redonda, and on the day following 2 more islands, St. Martin and Santa Cruz. The squadron anchored before Santa Cruz to take in water. There occurred a scene of grave import, reported by Peter Martyr in such expressive words that we cannot do better than quote them. The admiral, he says, ordered 30 men from his ship to go ashore and explore the island, and these men, being landed on the coast, were aware of 4 dogs and as many young men and women coming towards them, extending their arms in supplication and praying for help and deliverance from the cruel people. The cannibals, on seeing this, fled, as in the island of Guadeloupe, and all retired into the forests, and our people remained 2 days on the island to visit it. During that time, those who had remained with the boat saw a canoe coming towards them from a distance, containing 8 men and as many women. To these our people made signs, but they, on approaching, began to transpierce ours with their arrows, before they had time to cover themselves with their bucklers, so that one Spaniard was killed by shaft aimed by a woman, who also transfixed another with a second arrow. These savages had poisoned arrows, the poison being contained in the tip. Amongst them was a woman whom all the others obeyed, bowing before her. And this was, as they conjectured, a queen, having a son of cruel appearance, robust, and with the face of a lion, who followed her. Ours then, considering that it was better to fight hand to hand than to wait for greater evils in thus fighting at a distance, advanced their boat by rowing, and by so great violence did they make it move forward, that the stern of the said boat came with such velocity it caused the enemy's canoe to founder. But these Indians, being very good swimmers, without moving themselves either more slowly or more rapidly, did not cease, both men and women, to shoot arrows with all their might at our people. And they succeeded in reaching, by swimming, a rock covered with the water, upon which they mounted, and still fought manfully. Nevertheless, they were finally taken, and one of them slain, and the son of the queen, pierced in 2 places. When they were taken to the admiral's ship, they showed no less ferociousness and atrocity of mien than if they had been lions of Libya who felt themselves taken in the net. And such were they that no man could have even looked upon them without his heart trembling with horror, so greatly was their look hideous, terrible, and infernal. From all this it is clear that the strife between the Indians and the Europeans was beginning to be serious. Columbus sailed again towards the north, going in the midst of islands, pleasant and innumerable, covered with forests overshadowed by mountains of various hues. This collection of islands was called the archipelago of the 11,000 Virgins. Soon appeared the island of St. John Baptist, now Puerto Rico, a place infested by Caribbees, but cultivated with care, and appearing truly superb from its immense woods. Some sailors landed upon the shore, but only found there a dozen uninhabited huts. The admiral put to sea again and sailed along the southern coast of Puerto Rico for about 150 miles. On Friday, the 12th of November, Columbus at last reached the island of Hispaniola. With what emotions must he not have been agitated in revisiting the theater of his first success, in seeking to behold that fortress in which he had left his companions. What might not have happened in the course of a year to those Europeans left alone in this barbarous land? Soon a great canoe, bringing the brother of the cacique Guacanagari, came alongside of the Marie Galante, and the Indian prince, springing on board, offered 2 images of gold to the admiral. Still Columbus sought for his fortress, but although he had anchored opposite its site, there was no trace whatever to be seen of it. With feelings of the deepest anxiety as to the fate of his companions, he went on shore. What was his dismay when he found nothing left of the fortress but a few ashes? What could have become of his compatriots? Had their lives been the forfeit of this first attempt at colonization? The admiral ordered the simultaneous discharge of the cannon from all the ships to announce his arrival at Hispaniola, but none of his companions appeared. Columbus, in despair, immediately dispatched messengers to the cacique Guacanagari, who, on their return, brought sad news. If Guacanagari might be believed, some other caciques, irritated by the presence of the foreigners in their island, had attacked the unfortunate colonists and had massacred them to the last man. Guacanagari himself had received a wound in endeavoring to defend them, and to corroborate his story, he showed his leg enveloped in a cotton bandage. Columbus did not believe in this intervention of the cacique, but resolving to dissimulate, he welcomed Guacanagari kindly when he came on board the next day. The cacique accepted an image of the Virgin, suspending it on his bosom. He appeared astonished at the sight of the horses which they showed him, these animals having been hitherto quite unknown to himself and his companions. When his visit was over, he returned to the shore, regained the region of mountains, and was seen no more. The admiral then dispatched one of his captains with 300 men under his orders to scour the country and carry off the cacique. This captain penetrated far into the interior, but found no traces of the cacique, nor of the unfortunate colonists. During this excursion, a great river was discovered, and also a fine sheltered harbor, which was named Port Royal. However, in spite of the bad success of his first attempt, Columbus had resolved to found a new colony upon this island, which appeared to be rich both in gold and silver. The natives constantly spoke of mines situated in the province of Cibao, and in the month of January 2 gentlemen, Alonso de Hojda and Corvalan, set out accompanied by a numerous escort to verify these assertions. They discovered 4 rivers having auriferous sands and brought back with them a nugget which weighed 9 ounces. The admiral, on seeing these riches, was confirmed in his idea that Hispaniola was the famous Ophir, spoken of in the Book of Kings. After looking for a site upon which to build a town, he laid the foundation of Isabella in a spot at the mouth of a river which formed a harbor, and at a distance of 30 miles east from Monte Cristi. On the Feast of the Epiphany, 13 priests officiated in the church in presence of an immense crowd of natives. Columbus was now anxious to send news of the colony to the King and Queen of Spain. 12 ships laden with gold collected in the island and with various specimens of the produce of the soil were prepared to return to Europe under the command of Captain Torres. This flotilla set sail on the 2nd of February, 1494, and a short time afterwards Columbus sent back one more of the 5 ships which remained to him, with the Lieutenant Bernard of Pisa against whom he had cause of complaint. As soon as order was established in the colony of Isabella, the admiral, leaving his brother behind as governor, set out, accompanied by 500 men, to visit the mines of Cibao. The country they traversed seemed to be splendidly fertile. Vegetables came to perfection in 13 days. Corn sown in February was in full ear in April, and each year yielded 2 abundant harvests. They crossed successively mountains and valleys, where often the pickaxe had to be used to clear a way over these still virgin lands. At last, the Spaniards arrived at Cibao. There the admiral caused a fort to be constructed of wood and stone on a hill near the brink of a large river. It was surrounded with a deep ditch, and Columbus bestowed upon it the name of St. Thomas, in derision of some of his officers who were incredulous upon the subject of the gold mines. It ill became them to doubt, for from all parts the natives brought nuggets and gold dust, which they were eager to exchange for beads, and above all for the hawk's bells, of which the silvery sound excited them to dance. This country was not only a land of gold, it was also a country rich in spices and aromatic gums, the trees which bore them forming quite large forests. The Spaniards considered the conquest of this wealthy island a cause of unmixed congratulation. Columbus left 56 men to guard the fort of St. Thomas under the command of Don Pedro de Margarita, while he returned to Isabella towards the beginning of April, being much hindered on the road by excessive rain. On his arrival, he found the infant colony in great disorder. Famine was threatening from the want of flour, which could not be obtained, for there were no mills. Both soldiers and workmen were exhausted with fatigue. Columbus sought to oblige the gentlemen to aid them, but these proud hidalgos, anxious as they were to conquer fortune, would not stoop to pick it up, and refused to perform any manual labor. The priests upholding them in this conduct, Columbus, who was forced to act with vigor, was obliged to place the churches under an interdict. He could not spare time to remain any longer at Isabella, but was in haste to make further discoveries. Therefore, having formed a council composed of 3 gentlemen and the chief of the missionaries, under the presidency of Don Diego, to govern the colony, he set out on the 24th of April with 3 vessels to complete the cycle of his discoveries. The flotilla sailing towards the south, a new island was soon discovered, which was called by the natives Jamaica. The highest point of the island was a mountain of which the sides sloped gently down. The inhabitants appeared clever and much given to the mechanical arts, but they were far from pacific in character, and several times opposed the landing of the Spaniards, who, however, repulsed them, and at length the savages were induced to conclude a treaty of alliance with the admiral. From Jamaica, Columbus pushed his researches more towards the west. He imagined himself to be arrived at the point where the old geographers placed the golden region of the west, Chersonesus. Strong currents carried him towards Cuba, along whose coast he sailed for a distance of 666 miles. During this dangerous navigation amongst shallows and narrow passages, he named more than 700 islands, discovered a great number of harbors, and often entered into communication with the natives. Fishermen on the coast of Cuba. Fishermen on the coast of Cuba. In the month of May, the lookout men on board the ships descried a large number of grassy islands, fertile and inhabited. Columbus, on approaching the shore, entered a river, of which the water was so warm that the hand could not remain in it, a fact evidently of exaggeration, and one which later researches have not authenticated. The fishermen of this coast employed a certain fish called the remora or sucking fish, which fulfilled for them the same office as the dog does for the hunter. This fish was of an unknown species, having a body like a great eel, and upon the back of his head a very tenacious skin, in fashion like a purse, wherewith to take the fishes. They keep this fish fastened by a cord to the boat, always in the water, for it cannot bear the look of the air. And when they see a fish or a turtle, which there are larger than great bucklers, then they loose the fish by slackening the rope. And when he feels himself at liberty, suddenly, and more rapidly than the flight of an arrow, he, the remora, assails the said fish or turtle, throws over him his skin in the manner of a purse, and holds his prey so firmly, be it fish or turtle, by the part visible beyond the shell, that none can wrest it from him if he be not drawn to the surface of the water. The cord is therefore pulled up and gathered in. Little by little, and no sooner does he see the splendor of the air, then incontinent he lets go of his prey. And the fishermen descend as far as is necessary to take the prey, and they put it on board the boat, and fasten the fish hunter with as much of rope as is necessary for him to regain his old position and place. Then, by means of another rope, they give him for reward a small piece of the flesh of his prey. The exploration of the coasts continued towards the west. The admiral visited several countries in which abounded goslings, ducks, herons, and those dumb dogs which the natives eat, as we should kids, and which were probably either olmigui or raccoons. As the ships advanced, the sandy channels became narrower and narrower, and navigation more and more difficult, but the admiral adhered to his resolution of continuing the exploration of these coasts. One day he imagined he saw upon a point of land some men dressed in white, whom he took for brothers of the order of Santa Maria de la Merced. He sent some sailors to open communication with them, when it proved to be simply an optical illusion, these so-called monks turning out to be great tropical herons, to whom distance had lent the appearance of human beings. During the first days of June, Columbus was obliged to stop to repair the ships, of which the keels were much damaged by the shallow water on the coast. On the 7th day of the month, he caused a solemn mass to be celebrated on the shore. During the service, an old cacique arrived, who, the ceremony being over, offered the admiral some fruits, and then this native sovereign pronounced some words which the interpreters thus translated. It hath been told us, after what manner thou hast invested and enveloped with thy power these lands, which were to you unknown, and how thy presence has caused great terror to the people and the inhabitants. But I hold it my duty to exhort and to warn thee that two roads present themselves before the souls when they are separated from the bodies, the one, filled with shadows and sadness, destined for those who are harmful and hurtful to the human species, the other, pleasant and delightful, reserved for those who in their lifetime have loved peace and the repose of the people. Therefore, if thou rememberest that thou art mortal, and that the future retribution will be meted out according to the works of the present life, thou wilt take care to do harm to nobody. What philosopher of ancient or modern time could have spoken better or in sounder language? All the human side of Christianity is expressed in these magnificent words, and they came from the mouth of a savage. Columbus and the cacique separated, charmed with one another, and the more astonished of the two was not, perhaps, the old native. The rest of his tribe appeared to live in the practice of the excellent precepts indicated by their chief. Land was common property amongst the natives, as much so as sun, air, and water. The meum and tuum, cause of all strife, did not exist amongst them, and they lived content with little. They enjoy the golden age, says the narrative. They protect not their possessions with ditches and hedges, they leave their gardens open. Without laws, without books, without judges, they by nature follow what is right, and hold as bad and unjust whatever sins against or causes harm to another. Leaving Cuba, Columbus returned towards Jamaica and sailed along the whole of the southern coast as far as the eastern extremity of the island. His intention was to attack the islands of the Caribbees and destroy that mischievous brood. But the admiral was at this time seized with an illness brought on by watching and fatigue, which obliged him to suspend his projects. He was forced to return to Isabella, where, under the influence of good air and repose, and the care of his brother and his friends, he recovered his health. The colony greatly needed his presence. The governor of St. Thomas had aroused the indignation of the natives by his cruel exactions, and had refused to listen to the remonstrances upon the subject addressed to him by Don Diego, the brother of Columbus. He had returned to Isabella from St. Thomas during the absence of the admiral, and he embarked for Spain upon one of the ships which had just brought Don Bartolomeo, the second brother of Columbus, to Hispaniola. When the admiral regained his health, he resolved to punish the cacique who had revolted against the governor of St. Thomas, feeling that it would be unwise to allow his authority, in the person of his delegates, to be set at naught. In the first place, he sent 9 men well armed to take prisoner a bold cacique named Cayanabo. The leader Hojda, with an intrepidity of which we shall have further instances in the future, carried off the cacique from the midst of his own people and brought him prisoner to Isabella. Columbus afterwards sent Cayanabo to Europe, but the ship in which he sailed was wrecked during the voyage, and he was never heard of more. In the meantime, Antonio de Torres, sent by the King and Queen of Spain to compliment Columbus in their names, arrived at San Domingo with 4 vessels. Ferdinand declared himself highly content with the successes of the admiral and informed him that he was about to establish a monthly service of transport between Spain and Hispaniola. The carrying off of Cayanabo had excited a general revolt amongst the natives, who burned to revenge the chief, so deeply insulted and unjustly carried away. The cacique Guacanagari, notwithstanding the share he had had in the murder of the first colonists, alone remained faithful to the Spaniards. Columbus, accompanied by his brother Bartolomeo and the cacique, marched against the rebels and soon met with an army of natives, the numbers of which, with manifest exaggeration, he places at 100,000 men. However numerous it may have been, this army was quickly routed by a small detachment, composed of 200 infantry, 25 cavalry, and 25 dogs. This victory, to all appearance, re-established the admiral's authority. The Indians were condemned to pay tribute to the Spaniards. Those living near the mines were ordered to furnish every 3 months a small quantity of gold, while the others, more distant, were to contribute 25 pounds of cotton. But rebellion had been only curbed, not extinguished. At the voice of a woman, Anacayana, widow of Cayanabo, the natives rose a second time, and even succeeded in drawing over the hitherto faithful Guacanagari to their side. The rebels destroyed all the fields of maize and everything else which had been planted, and then retired into the mountains. The Spaniards, seeing themselves thus reduced to all the horrors of famine, indulged their anger by terrible reprisals against the natives. It is calculated that 1/3 of the island population perished from hunger, sickness, and the weapons of the companions of Columbus. These unfortunate Indians paid dearly indeed for their intercourse with the conquering Europeans. The good fortune of Columbus was by this time on the wane. While his authority in Hispaniola was continually more and more compromised, his reputation and his character were the objects of violent attack in Europe. The officers whom he had sent back to the mother country loudly accused him of injustice and cruelty. They even insinuated that he sought to render himself independent of the king, and against all these attacks, Columbus, being absent, could not defend himself. Ferdinand, influenced by this unworthy discourse, chose a commissioner, whom he ordered to proceed to the West Indies and to examine into the truth of the accusations. This gentleman was named Juan d'Aguado, and the choice of such a man to fulfill such a mission, possessing as he did a mind both prejudiced and partial, was not a happy one. Aguado arrived at Isabella in the month of October, at the time when the admiral was absent on an exploring expedition, and began at once to treat the brother of Columbus with extreme haughtiness, while Diego on his side, relying upon his title of Governor-General, refused to submit to the commands of the royal commissioner. Aguado soon considered himself ready to return to Spain, although the examination he had made was a most incomplete one, when a fearful hurricane occurred, which sank the vessels which had brought him over in the harbor. There now remained only 2 caravels at Hispaniola, but Columbus, who had returned to the colony, acting with a greatness of soul which cannot be too much admired, placed one of these ships at the disposal of the commissioner, with the proviso that he himself would embark in the other to plead his cause in person before the king. So matters stood when the news arriving of the discovery of fresh gold mines in Hispaniola caused the admiral to put off his departure. Covetousness was a power strong enough to cut short all discussions. There was no longer any mention of the King of Spain, nor of the inquiry which he had ordered. Officers were sent off to the new auriferous ground, finding their nuggets, of which some weighed as much as 20 ounces, and a lump of amber of the weight of 300 pounds. Columbus ordered 2 fortresses to be erected for the protection of the miners, one on the boundary of the province of Cibao, the other upon the banks of the river Haina. Having taken this precaution, he set out for Europe, full of eagerness to justify himself. The 2 caravels sailed from the harbor of St. Isabella on the 10th of March, 1496. On board of the admiral's ship were 225 persons and 30 Indians. On the 9th of April he touched at Marie Galante, and on the 10th at Guadeloupe to take in water. Here there occurred a sharp skirmish with the natives. On the 20th he left this inhospitable island, and for a whole month he had to contend with contrary winds. On the 11th of June land was sighted in Europe, and on the next day the caravels entered the harbor of Cadiz. This second return of the great navigator was not welcomed, as the first had been, by the acclamations of the populace. To enthusiasm had succeeded coldness and envy. The companions even of the admiral took part against him. Discouraged as they were, with illusions destroyed, and not bringing back that wealth, for the acquisition of which they had encountered so many dangers and submitted to so much fatigue, they became unjust, and forgot that it was not the fault of Columbus if the mines hitherto worked had been a source of expense rather than of profit. However, the admiral was received at court with a certain measure of favor, the narrative of his second voyage doing much to reinstate him in public opinion. And who could deny that during that expedition he had discovered the islands of Dominica, Marie Galante, Guadeloupe, Montserrat, Santa Maria, Santa Cruz, Puerto Rico, Jamaica? Had he not also carried out a new survey of Cuba and San Domingo? Columbus fought bravely against his adversaries, even employing against them the weapon of irony. To those who denied the merit of his discoveries, he proposed the experiment of making an egg remain upright while resting upon one end, and when they could not succeed in doing this, the admiral, breaking the top of the shell, made the egg stand upon the broken part. "You had not thought of that," said he, "but behold, it is done." 4. Christopher Columbus. Third voyage, Madeira, Santiago in the Cape Verde archipelago, Trinidad, first sight of the American coast in Venezuela, beyond the Orinoco, now the province of Cumana, Gulf of Paria, the gardens, Tobago, Grenada, Margarita, Cubaga, Hispaniola during the absence of Columbus, foundation of the town of San Domingo, arrival of Columbus, insubordination in the colony, complaints in Spain, Bobadilla sent by the king to inquire into the conduct of Columbus, Columbus sent to Europe in fetters with his two brothers, his appearance before Ferdinand and Isabella, renewal of royal favor. Columbus had not yet given up the hope of pursuing his conquests on the further side of the Atlantic Ocean. No fatigue, no injustice from his fellow men could stop him. After having triumphed, although not without difficulty, over the malice of his enemies, he succeeded in organizing a third expedition under the auspices of the Spanish government. The king granted him 8 vessels, 40 cavalry soldiers, and 100 infantry, 60 sailors, 20 miners, 50 laborers, 20 workmen of various trades, 30 women, some doctors, and even some musicians. The admiral obtained the concession, besides, that all the punishments in use in Spain should be changed into transportation to the islands. He was thus the precursor of the English in the intelligent idea of peopling new colonies with convicts, whom labor was to reform. Embarkation of Christopher Columbus. Embarkation of Christopher Columbus. Columbus put to sea on the 30th of May, 1498, although he was still suffering from gout and from the various mental trials which he had experienced since his return. Before starting, he learnt that a French fleet was lying in wait off Cape St. Vincent with the purpose of hindering the expedition. To avoid it, Columbus made for Madeira and anchored there. From that island he dispatched all his vessels, except 3, to Hispaniola under the command of the captains Pedro de Arana, Alonso Sanchez of Carabajal, and Juan Antonio Columbus, one of his own relations, while he, with a large ship and 2 caravels, bore down to the south with the intention of crossing the equator and seeking for more southern countries, which, according to the general opinion, must be even richer in all kinds of productions. On the 27th of June, the small flotilla touched at the islands of Celle and of Santiago, which form part of the Cape Verde group. It sailed again on the 4th of July and made 360 miles to the southwest, experiencing long calms and intense heat. On arriving abreast of Sierra Leone, it steered due west, and at midday on the 31st of July, one of the sailors raised the cry of land. It was an island situated at the northeastern extremity of South America and very near the coast. The admiral gave it the name of Trinidad, and all the crews chanted the Salve Regina in sign of thankfulness. On the morrow, the 1st of August, at 15 miles from the part of the land which had been first seen, the 3 vessels were moored near to the point of Alcatraz, and the admiral sent some of his sailors ashore to obtain water and wood. The coast appeared to be uninhabited, but numerous footprints of animals were observed, made, as was thought, by goats. On the 2nd of August, a long canoe manned by 24 natives came towards the ships. These Indians, tall of stature and paler in color than those of Hispaniola, wore upon the head a turban formed of a cotton scarf of brilliant colors and a small skirt of the same material around the body. The Spaniards endeavored to entice them on board by showing them mirrors and glass trinkets, the sailors even executing lively dances in the hope of inspiring them with confidence. But the savages, taking fright at the sound of a tambourine, which seemed to them a sign of hostility, discharged a flight of arrows and directed their canoe towards one of the caravels, whose pilot endeavored to reassure them by steering towards them. But in vain, the canoe soon made off and was seen no more.